Mr. Graceful.
Mr. Speaker, I thank members for their support and constructive views on this bill. I'm heartened that all members agree that the revised carbon tax regime set out in the bill is a decisive step in climate action. The revised carbon tax level will incentivize energy and carbon efficiency in all sectors and tilt the scales in favor of additional decarbonization solutions such as carbon capture, utilization and storage, and low-carbon hydrogen. They have been calibrated to enable the pace of transformation needed to achieve our net zero ambition, while allowing businesses to stay economically competitive as they embark on their low-carbon transition. Our approach provides certainty by giving advance notice to companies and announcing the rates ahead of time. I'll respond to members' questions on the issues raised under three broad themes. First, the environment. How do we maintain a strong impetus? Ensuring that allowances granted under the transition framework do not blunt the purpose of the carbon price, and that the international carbon credits regime is robust. MOS Low Yen Ling has addressed members' questions on the transition framework and industry support schemes. I will speak about the ICC regime shortly. Second, the economy. Members spoke on the need to maintain our economic competitiveness amidst the transition to a low-carbon economy, which MOS Low has spoken on. Many members have also highlighted how this new carbon tax regime can create new growth opportunities. How can we support a vibrant carbon services ecosystem in Singapore, which can create good green jobs for Singaporeans? And third, the society. As we update the carbon tax regime, how do we deliver an inclusive transition towards a low-carbon society? And let me address these issues in turn. First, on the environment. As Ms. Jenna Ang has highlighted, we must ensure that the carbon credits surrendered or offset are of high environmental integrity. Ms. Ho Ting Roo brought up the same point. Our ICC framework will be underpinned by a set of robust criteria, which will minimally be aligned to the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, or CORSIA, standards which have been endorsed internationally. CORSIA standards are amongst the most rigorous in carbon markets worldwide, and they include criteria such as additionality and permanence, issues that Ms. Ho has mentioned. Additionality means that emission reductions must be above business as usual levels. Permanence requires emission reductions to be durable and irreversible. Furthermore, we will ensure alignment with international rules, such as Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. One such requirement is no double counting. Double counting occurs when an eligible ICC accrues to both Singapore and the host country producing this ICC. To prevent this ICC from being double counted, the host country must authorize a corresponding adjustment to give up the emissions reduction to Singapore. These are standards which must be mutually agreed upon when we conclude carbon credits collaboration with partner countries. We will publish a whitelist of ICCs that are acceptable, which will highlight the eligible host countries, carbon crediting programs, and methodologies. This will provide more clarity to companies and to the public on what our eligibility criteria entails. By placing emphasis on the quality of eligible ICC surrendered, we ensure that companies exercise care and due diligence in sourcing high-quality ICC responsibly and avoid the associated pitfalls, as Ms. Janet Ang and Ms. He has highlighted. On the carbon credits registry, later this week, NEA will be calling a tender for the development of the International Carbon Credits Registry, or ICC registry. When ready, the registry will serve as a record-keeping system to track and account for the usage of ICC by carbon tax-liable companies to offset their taxable emissions. The ICC registry will be an integral part of our ICC framework. In developing and implementing our ICC framework, we have been and will continue to work closely with industry players, green groups, and other key stakeholders. So I've explained quite extensively how we develop our ICC framework with high standards: COSIA, additionality, permanence, Paris Agreement, Article 6, no double counting, registry, and so on. And there's also a parallel work stream that's going on the voluntary market side. So MAS, SGX, for example, are hard at work to contribute to credible and robust taxonomies. This is a very nascent area, and I think many parts, many different organizations, different sectors are working very quickly to get alignment and harmonization of standards. And we must be there. Singapore must be there in order to have the first mover advantage that Ms. Ang has talked about. And in this way, we hope that by having the ICC really as a foundation, the voluntary markets can take guidance and also benefit from the carbon services competencies that we will help develop in Singapore. So although this bill does not address the voluntary carbon market, which I will talk about later on, but I hope that my explanation on what we are doing on ICC help address some of the concerns over greenwashing. Second, on the economy and creating growth opportunities, specifically how the government will unlock supply of ICC and support the growth of the carbon services and trading ecosystems in Singapore. I agree with Ms. Jen Ang on the importance of diversifying our sources of credit supply, including our source countries and the types of carbon credit projects. I spoke earlier about our G2G engagements, which are progressing well. We will advance talk with like-minded countries to establish implementation agreements and bilateral frameworks to guide interested parties to procure and trade in high-quality credits. At the technical level, we are working closely with key players in the carbon services and trading ecosystem to develop the ICC framework. In July, NEA signed memorandums of understanding with leading carbon credit programs, namely Vera and Gold Standard, which together account for over 70% of global carbon credit issuances. With these MOUs in mind, or with these MOUs in place, carbon companies will be able to acquire eligible ICC from projects registered with these programs and surrender them to offset part of their carbon tax liabilities. Our intent is for the ICC framework to catalyze local demand in carbon markets and support our vision of establishing Singapore as a carbon services and trading hub. Carbon services are a promising potential growth area for Singapore that can create good green jobs for Singaporeans while contributing to the global agenda on climate change. Growth in carbon markets will drive demand for jobs related to low carbon project development, financing, consultancy, and measurement, reporting, and verification, or MRV. Singapore is well placed to leverage these opportunities. One notable example is the Climate Action Data Trust, or CAT Trust, which will be officially launched next month as a global market infrastructure supported by the World Bank, the International Emissions Trading Association, and the Singapore government. The CAT Trust will be anchored in Singapore to provide an open source system to link and harmonize information about carbon credits and projects across registries globally. This initiative will drive market transparency, strengthen trust, and advance global climate action. And Singapore, I think, is well placed because we have developed trust and confidence with investors over decades, and we will maintain this confidence and high level of integrity in this new era that we go into as well. The CAT Trust will join a thriving ecosystem of over 70 organizations in Singapore, providing carbon services to the region and beyond. Ms. Jen Ang asks if the government plans to ensure the credibility of voluntary carbon trading activities in Singapore and manage related risks. Other members also asked about the development of voluntary carbon trading activities. I'd like to clarify again that the ICC framework does not apply to the voluntary carbon market. It is not envisaged for this bill to address that. Our approach is to build up a vibrant carbon services ecosystem and provide the space for leading international and corporate initiatives to shape the voluntary marketplace. These include the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative and the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets, which develop guidelines that promote the trading of voluntary carbon credits with high environmental integrity. As companies' use of voluntary carbon credits evolves, we will continue to study whether there is a need to adopt a more prescriptive approach. Ms. Polisan, Ms. Jen Ang raised concerns that setting the facility level limit for the use of ICC at 5% might be too low, considering the current limitations in technologies that can achieve emissions reduction at scale and the need to support a vibrant carbon market. As mentioned earlier, we are starting with 5% as the facility level limit to prioritize domestic abatement efforts. Are we right? Does it have to be 5%? Can it be 8%? Can it be 3%? Nobody knows. We are in a new area. So what we'll do is start at 5%, at the limit that we think that we can manage, and then as the market develops, we will see how it goes and we will make changes along the way. So I'd just like to assure members that in this phase, let's not be too prescriptive. Let's have an effective system that can help us grow this system from a very nascent stage in something that we can be proud of. If we start putting too many rules, I think you may make a scheme ineffective, even it can be the most transparent in the world. We will review the facility level limit over time and align with international best practices as carbon markets develop. This brings me to Ms. Hertingru's proposed amendment pertaining to instances where the prescribed facility level limit is lifted. We're not able to support this proposed amendment as it involves the publication of identified information relating to the registered business facility and bridges the confidentiality of carbon tax data which companies are accorded under the Carbon Pricing Act. But I think I have explained, I hope that I've explained sufficiently how our overall framework supports transactions of high environmental standards and that there's sufficient safeguards in terms of registry, in terms of standards that will allow a nascent system to grow. I understand that Ms. He has suggested that perhaps we can disclose without financial details. But imagine we are in a situation where we are discussing with companies on what type of ICC they are going to engage in. And if a company has something that is groundbreaking, that involves significant investments, such that significant ICC is required to justify it. But if the system out there says, look, anything above 5%, disclosure, even though details are not there, but your names will be flashed on the papers. Do you think there'll be more companies stepping forward, or there'll be fewer companies stepping forward? So I think we have to be quite practical at this stage, feel our way through, and if we find that 5% is indeed not sufficient, members can be assured they will come back to this chamber to ask for this level to be increased. Because we are all in the same boat, we want the same thing, which is a well-functioning carbon credit system that has environmental integrity. I will now address the final group of issues which deal with balancing the interests of all stakeholders as we manage a fair and inclusive transition. Ms. Janet Ang and Mr. Louis Ng asked about the government's plan for the carbon tax to be imposed on more emitters beyond the large emitters. The current carbon tax threshold of 25,000 tonnes ensures that the carbon price is efficiently applied at key nodes of the economy and maximizes coverage while minimizes, I would say, optimizes administrative burden on businesses. This covers around 80% of Singapore's emissions, one of the most comprehensive in the world. Coupled with our existing taxes on transport fuels, which is not subjected to carbon tax, we have separate taxes on fuel. We are actually achieving around 90% coverage. We are one of the world's highest. Mr. Louis Ng asked how compliance costs would increase if the next tier of facilities, that is, the reportable facilities, were taxed as well. Such facilities would have to incur not just the cost of reporting or the cost of paying taxes, they will have to get their reported emissions verified. Because once you have to pay tax, we will need you to have it checked by experts, by auditors. And this will be a cost burden for a company perhaps with a much lower carbon tax because they have dropped off from this top 80%. So it will be disproportionate to the carbon tax payable. Furthermore, as reportable facilities contribute only about 1% of Singapore's emissions, it will add little to the already high coverage of 80%. I thank Mr. Louis Ng and Mr. Leon Pereira for the suggestions on publishing carbon tax data, including those proposed as amendments to the bill. Public disclosure of data needs to be contextualized so that it can be interpreted fairly and meaningfully. Our large emitters have products and production processes that are often heterogeneous, specialized, and proprietary. Publishing the emissions or ranking of top emitters without providing context of the business and nature or the size of its operation may not be helpful in understanding how well a company is doing in mitigating its emissions. Two refineries, same products altogether, both getting the same kind of allowances. Is that definitely fair? What if I tell you that one refinery actually is adopting very, very carbon inefficient processes? The other one is way ahead. Without background information, without understanding its processes, you can't just look at two numbers and say this is fair or this is not fair and why you're giving this. There must be a system that public officers can work out, and I think as MOS Law has explained, they have to be benchmarked, they will have to produce their plan so that we can support them on a multi-year decarbonization journey. For accountability to their stakeholders, we encourage all companies to size, to analyze, and to publish their environmental impact, to explain how they're managing emissions-related risks in relation to their commitment to decarbonization. Companies listed locally are already subjected to SGX requirements to do so, as in many jurisdictions globally. Nonetheless, we will study possible ways to better facilitate environmental impact disclosure in a manner that respects commercial sensitivity. We appreciate the concerns from Mr. Gan Tian Po, Mr. Xie Yao Quan, Mr. Mark Che, Professor James Lim, that the revised carbon tax levels will lead to higher costs amidst rising inflationary pressures. Members of both sides of the House recognize that the effectiveness of a carbon tax to drive decarbonization depends on the price level and have spoken in support of a rise in the carbon tax. We all agree that $5 is not right, so we need to move, right? And global warming doesn't pause because of inflation. So rather than holding back our plans, the government has been and will continue to provide support in a targeted manner to affected businesses and households as part of our long-standing commitment to an inclusive low-carbon transition. And this is where, I listened very carefully to Professor James Lim, and I have difficulty accepting his recommendations on implementation. First, he has acknowledged that he has actually asked for a higher carbon tax range. He quoted, if I'm not wrong, 80 to 133 as a range, and with $100 as a useful midpoint or benchmark for our carbon tax level. So this 80 to 133 is significantly higher than what we have stated, which is 50 to 80. So I'm glad that Workers' Party is supporting an even higher carbon tax range from a Minister for Sustainability and Environment. You know, you are my best champion along with me. But secondly, then he went on to say that actually this is not a very good time because, like many of the members as well, we have inflation, we have energy shortages. So perhaps instead of giving a fixed number that may bind the hands of policymakers of the future, he has suggested this, I hope that I've gotten it correctly, which is that carbon tax to adhere to a central rate, but with a variable component that varies over time according to conditions of the economy. In other words, scale back when the economy is in recession, raise when the economy is strong. I have much difficulties in implementation. As much as Professor Lim has suggested this as a way to ease implementation, I would find it hard to implement. First of all, I would like Professor Lim to give me a 3-year projection of what the economic conditions will be, and then what that variation would be. Secondly, and he said that MAS will be able to project that. Nobody can project what has happened. We have all seen how exogenous factors have affected our economic conditions. Who has expected COVID-19? Who has thought about Ukraine war? So what do? We go out to a market, stand in the chamber here and say, by the way, we're going to raise carbon tax. But we can't really sure. It's somewhere around 80 to 133, but there's some middle number, and then you can move around a bit. How can company make plans like that? When you want them to invest in a plant that is energy efficient, that captures carbon, or in green hydrogen, you have to tell them what is likely going to be the prevailing carbon tax, so that when they do a multi-year calculation, as Member Leon Perella has stated that's what companies would do, sometimes even up to 10, 20 years, they need to have certainty. Otherwise, they will not be able to price in the effect of higher carbon price. Otherwise, it will be unfair to companies who have invested in hydrogen and they turn around and find that there's no takers because carbon price differential is missing. The government said that it's going to do, but actually, because economic situation, not doing. So we find it very hard to accept his suggestion. And also, he has suggested that maybe we should push back. We are suggesting that we raise the carbon tax in 2024. And that leaves us 6 years to 2030. So if you're going to push back 1-2 years until recession is completely over, which I really don't know when that's going to be, that means that it leaves us to about 4 years to raise from $5 to $100. Is that better or not for companies? So with humility, I will say that I find it hard to accept his suggestion for implementation. Ms. Polisan and Mr. Donwe have pointed out that the government does not expect to derive additional revenue from the upcoming revisions to the carbon tax. And that is correct. The carbon tax revenue will be used to accelerate decarbonization efforts and Singapore's inclusive transition to a green economy. MOS Low has spoken about how the government is supporting our industry along their decarbonization journey. In addition to energy efficiency support measures for businesses, Mr. Mark Che will be pleased to note that we have earmarked funds under the Research, Innovation and Enterprise 2025 plan for the research, development and demonstration of low-carbon technologies that can drive deeper decarbonization. We will cushion the impact on our households. So while I cannot accept Prof. Lim's suggestion, we will have to, from time to time, evaluate our carbon tax, Maybe we had it too high, maybe we had it too low, maybe we can move faster. Maybe there's already technologies out there that can make carbon price effective. We will have to change, but we need to give companies sufficient notice. And what we do in a year when it's bad, businesses is bad, utility is high, like we are experiencing now, you can be assured that the government will have very targeted measures that is timely and relevant for that time of the year. And the same with households. And just for the members' information, at $25 per ton, which is really our next step, from 5 to 25 in 2024. So we haven't even raised carbon tax yet. Huh? So nothing of this higher utility cost is attributable to carbon tax. So it's only going to come in 2024 at $25 per ton. The rise in carbon tax would translate to an estimated increase of about $4 per month in the utility bills for an average 4-room HDB households. When the carbon tax was first introduced in 2019, U-Save rebates were provided to offer transitional support to help affected households adjust. We have been and will continue to support households with U-Save rebates. As members would know, I think the last 6-12 months we have been supporting our households because of inflation, because of higher utility costs. And I think it's no secret that we support households, 4-room flat, up to 5 months of utility bills. And just to put things in context again, carbon tax, as it stands now for a year, every year, we are collecting to the grand tune of $200 million. That's all. $200 million. So it is not enough to move the cost of goods. So those are other effects, other inflationary pressures that's coming in because of other factors. And just the utility bills support, the U-Save rebates that I mentioned to households, cost the government $580 million for financial year 2022. So just to give you a measure of the scale that we are talking about, we are prepared to support households, even way above what we are collecting, whether it's GST or whether it's carbon tax. So I think members have the assurance that while we have fixed a carbon tax according to a schedule to give companies certainty, we will always be minded about the needs of companies, the needs of households, the need of society, when the effect is felt, when the increase is actually implemented. We are also reviewing ongoing schemes, such as the Climate-Friendly Households Program, to encourage more households to mitigate the long-term cost impact by making the switch to energy-efficient appliances and water savings fittings. So members, if you have residents who fit the criteria, who wants to reduce their utility bill by switching to more energy-efficient appliances, please step forward, please ask them to apply to NEA. Mr. Speaker, the carbon pricing bill was first introduced in this House in 2018 as a key step in readying our economy and strengthening our competitiveness as the world transits to a low-carbon future. Since then, we have accelerated our sustainability journey and stepped up our climate ambition. As Paul Lee-San noted, achieving net zero by 2050 will be a daunting but necessary undertaking. With our enhanced climate targets, our carbon pricing regime must evolve in tandem. As members have noted in today's debate, our carbon tax regime must strike a fine balance between 3 imperatives: the environment, our economy, and our society. To reach our ambition of net zero emissions by 2050, we must drive decarbonization while ensuring that ICC are sourced from projects of high environmental integrity. And here, again, I'd like to thank members, all members who have spoken, for your support of a higher carbon tax rate. And particularly, I note WP's position, all your members, Ms. Herting Rue, Professor James Lim, Mr. Leon Pereira, Mr. Louis Chia supported the need for carbon tax, and they want even more higher carbon tax. They think that we are still too low at 50 to 80. So we have considered all that. As the Minister for Sustainability and Environment, I would really want to raise it as high as possible. So I said you are really, along with me on this journey. But we have to take into consideration the next point, which is really the economy. So we note your suggestion. We think that we are carbon tax, we have announced, and we have been repeatedly telling companies that these are the level that's going to come in the last 12 months. We will stick with this, but we will take your suggestions into consideration. And as we transit to a low-carbon economy, we must keep an eye on our economic competitiveness so that Singapore remains an attractive investment and business destination and generates green growth opportunities and good jobs for Singaporeans. And we must strive to deliver an inclusive transition for our society and spur action across the whole of society and catalyze partnerships across the people, public and private sectors. The proposed changes, as set out in this bill, have been carefully considered in close consultation with the industry and the public. Taken together, they will enable the next lap of our green transition and lay the building blocks for Singapore as an economically competitive global sustainability hub. With an effective carbon price at the cornerstone of our climate mitigation efforts, the government will continue to push the envelope on all fronts to secure a climate resilient and sustainable future for Singapore. I call on all members of the House to give your support to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
I thank the Minister for her run-up speech, and like the Minister, I would also emphasize that there is agreement from members from both the ruling party and the opposition excuse me, on the need for us to hike the carbon price and on the broad thrust of this bill. So I just have a few clarifications on the points that the Minister mentioned in relation to some of the amendments that we have filed. Firstly, on the limitations on time for the allowance regime, the changes that we have proposed, I do take the point made by MOS Low Yen Ling that the government has set a more ambitious target overall and in aggregate for carbon emissions to achieve a certain target by 2030, and that puts pressure on the government to curb and curtail allowances. Nevertheless, having a more ambitious aggregate target may still allow either this government or some future government, in theory and principle, to prop up a company with a fairly generous level of allowances in perpetuity for a long time, and to do so in a manner that is not transparent. And I think were that to happen, were that possibility to be left open, in the legislation, that possibility would undermine wider public acceptance of a much-needed carbon price hike and perhaps acceptance within the business community itself. If I'm a company that is a large emitter, I would want to know that there's a certain amount of transparency about which entities are being given allowances. So I would like to pose this clarification, which is that, is the government open to having some kind of legislative mechanism that would limit the allowances in terms of time to prevent this possibility of a company in perpetuity getting allowances up to the maximum that is referred to in the point of reference? That's my first clarification. Second clarification is, would the government acknowledge that, notwithstanding the changes that we have suggested to the allowance regime, the government possesses other tools through other laws. The government has other powers that allow it to apply economic incentives in cases where it may really be necessary to prevent disinvestment for job creation, job defense. And that would allow us to have a carbon pricing regime that is where the curtailment on the allowance regime is a bit more clear, and the transparency level is a bit better, but at the same time, we are still able to retain and win these strategically important projects. So that's my second clarification. My third clarification is in terms of the public registry that we have suggested. So I want to stress again that we are not calling for the amounts of allowances to be disclosed or the amounts of ICCs being used to be disclosed. But I would like to ask again whether the government would consider that a public registry may actually strengthen confidence in the regime, buying to a new carbon price hike, which does impose significant burdens on companies and on households, and would impose a certain amount of public accountability for the public to know that these are the entities that are getting allowances, and we are able to see that these entities are doing their best, or they're contributing back to the country, they are making progress towards lowering their emissions and so on. Would the government acknowledge there's some benefit to that transparency? And my last clarification is, if the government does not wish to have this public register, I believe both MOS Low and Minister Grace Fu referred to the government studying, publishing some kind of aggregate data in the future. Would the government be open to publishing the number of allowances that have been awarded, just in aggregate, and the extent of emissions that are covered by allowances in aggregate in the future, if they don't want this public registry proposal? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member, Mr. Leon Pereira, for his supplementary questions, clarifications. And I want to assure him and also the House that even as we put in place the transition framework to support the EITE companies to transit to low-carbon future, I want to assure him that we maintain the impetus for them to decarbonize as quickly as possible. In fact, we want to catalyze the process for them to do so. And certainly, as we rolled out the transition framework, it will not give any companies a free pass. I just want to reiterate again, it is really because you remember that the Singapore government just updated our 2030 NDC's commitment. And members said that, as far as Singapore is concerned, people know that when we say we will do it, we will achieve it. In fact, we will put in place interim milestones to make sure we get there by 2030 and by 2050. And so the Singapore government is certainly accountable to this international climate commitment. And that is why the transition framework that we put in place is meant to ensure that the EITE companies are able to really catalyze their decarbonization journey. And I want to assure him that even as we avail the allowance, it is really only for a portion of the emissions. And it is given based on internationally recognized efficiency standards where available, as well as the individual facilities decarbonization plans. And all these plans, I can assure you, will be scrutinized. Will be scrutinized, and there will be checks and balances, within the relevant authority and within the ministry, and in fact, across ministry, because as far as climate change is concerned, there is we have an interministerial committee on climate change. So there is checks and balances, there's accountability, there's transparency. And I shared with the House earlier in my speech, in time where appropriate, the government will certainly release aggregated information on the amount of allowances provided. But I urge everyone to have a care, and I think Ms. Janet Ang and many members reminded us, at this very nascent stage, as we are creating this, to make sure that we are well placed to capture the green opportunities, not just for SMEs, but also for Singaporean workers, our youth, our mid-career hires, etc. We want to make sure that we do not overly constrain our ability to respond to the emerging market opportunities and the trends as well. So we need to bear in mind whether such disclosures may inadvertently divulge commercially sensitive information. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to share some numbers very quickly. We talked about some of these sectors, and Ms. Janet Ang reminded us that the EITE sectors have actually poured in significant, in fact, billions of dollars of investment in Singapore over decades, creating very good jobs for Singaporeans. And these EITE companies are key investors and are global leaders that collectively contribute about 21 billion Sing dollars in value add and employ about 29,000 workers here in Singapore. not just that, not just economic value add, not just jobs, but they also form an important ecosystem for our local SMEs as their suppliers, as their business partners. So these are really what is at stake to ensure that, make sure that we take a very calibrated approach as we put in place a transition framework, as we catalyze their transition to low-carbon future. We want to make sure that we do not inadvertently diminish our competitiveness as a business and investment location, thereby hurting our ability to create good jobs for people in Singapore.
Mr. Grace.
To add on to MOS Law, I think we are an accountable government, and we'll be prepared to accountable to the people, and we are accountable with our results. So you're going to look at our commitment in 2030, our year-to-year carbon emissions, and hold us accountable. I think the line of questions that members have given seems to suggest that, we have something to hide and, we need to hide some incentives somewhere else. There's really no need. What we really want is to make sure that our public officers have the ability to engage companies confidently, keeping in mind their obligation to maintain commercial confidentiality, for the simple reasons that the companies may be competitors themselves. Secondly, we may have competitors outside Singapore. So, like many of these discussions, like many of these plans, we want to respect each other's requirements. So we have taken the stand that, we will keep individual disclosure confidential. And ultimately, you look at our budget every year. Have we overspent? Do we have items that's not accounted for? Have we, have schemes that cannot be explained to people? I think our track record speaks for itself. And we will stand in this House again, year after year, to justify to you how we have been doing on our carbon green plan and our carbon emission.
So, Professor Jameson.
Thank you, Speaker. Just two clarifications to Minister Fu. The first has to do with the notion of whether we are indeed calling for a higher rate. The median I suggested was $100 per tonne. And it is true, certainly, that in the long run, we seek for something of that nature for a good reason, as I explained, that it was the midpoint of what is scientifically credible and defensible. Now, that said, I think it's important to distinguish between the level, the appropriate level, versus the manner by which we get to that level, the glide path, if you will. The analogy is to think about how one might choose to target one's weight loss journey. First, you choose a target weight. Let's say I really wish to be 65 kilograms.
Mr. Jameson, what is your clarification?
Yes. So the clarification then is whether the ministry sees or does not see the merits of separating these two decisions about the appropriate level of the carbon tax versus the glide path to get there. Now, my second clarification has to do with something that she said about how businesses cannot operate without certainty when we do not know what the carbon tax is going to be. I'm befuddled because, of course, even now, government routinely alters levers of policy, such as the interest rate. When there is uncertainty on a year-to-year basis about the level of interest rate, yet businesses continue to invest. Put it another way, let's say the ministry telegraphed that it was originally going for 25...
Again, what is the clarification?
I'm getting there, sir. So originally, the ministry telegraphed the $25 a tonne rate next year, and we entered into a recession. Would she believe that businesses would then be very upset if we said that we would scale this $25 a tonne back to something lower to eventually raise it subsequently?
I think Mr. Speaker, Professor Lim started his speech earlier saying that, we have the theory right, but we need to get the implementation right. So I like to maybe ask him for his suggestion of how the government should be positioning the carbon tax in his way. What will be your target? Is $100? If it's long run, which year? Is it 2030 still?
Just to be clear, the government has not also committed to a 50 to 80.
Oh, we have. 50
in the
to
long.
80 is our range. So what is your range?
And that was well stated, 58 to 133 with the midpoint of being 100.
Okay, so that's your range is higher than the government, is it correct?
The lower bound is lower than the government's upper bound.
50 to 80, yours is 58 to 133.
Yes, the lower bound that I gave you is lower than the government's upper bound.
All right, okay. So can you please try to tell me, if you are the Minister of Sustainability and Environment, how would you glide to this number? Well, how would you glide? Okay, this is 2022. We are end of 2022. You're going to go out and say, company, this is the new glide path. How will you describe your glide path?
That was the content of my speech. I suggested that we could do it incrementally, the way that the ministry has suggested, but I also suggested that we could allow the specific level to adjust upward and downward according to economic conditions.
So are you then saying that we can go out to the world and say, sorry, I've made the 2030 NDC on the basis of certain economic conditions, and now that the economic conditions are bad, there's a war out there, there is high inflation and energy, my NDCs don't count because I need to glide further out?
No, but I think I was clear that the adjustments upwards and downwards are the same way that business cycles go upward and downward. So you would have it lower in a given year because of economic conditions, but when things picked up, you would raise it back so that you met the original target.
So you are suggesting a very variable carbon tax rate ends with 58 to 133, but without knowing how it's going to get there. Not even knowing what 2024 is going to be.
I think you would set a target, but be able to adapt to economic conditions the same way the interest rates are routine.
Rate for 2024?
As I said, it's not complicated. You set a target.
What is that rate? What is the number?
We can go with the government's proposed number, say start with $25,
Okay, so
as I said in my speech.
2025, are you going to stay with $25 as well? Or
We would have to look at economic conditions.
So I'd like to repeat.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I understand that when a member asks a question, the other member sits down, question is answered, vice versa. There's some decorum between both parties.
I apologize for that. I will sit down. Okay. Please, can you please tell me, describe to me your carbon tax glide path in numbers? Because I'm a business, I need to know. I speak on behalf of the business. I need to know. Can you please tell me with some certainty what is that variable portion? Even if you say 25 for 2 years to come, 45, I'm not too sure, but what will be the variation?
So I'm happy to clarify. Again, we are not opposed to the original path. So for the next year and the subsequent year, we are comfortable with going with that $25 that was originally there. But I'm pushing for the flexibility to adjust it upward or downward just to take account of the fact that economic conditions may alter, the same way we do for interest rates.
I think that, Mr. Speaker, this is not a fiscal policy. This is a policy to change our energy mix and our energy use. So whether there is going to be an economic downturn or not, this is a change that we all need to make. And members have spoken so passionately about the need to address the tragedies of commons, the climate change that is helping us. So are we going to delay further? No. The answer is we all need to change. If there is an economic problem, if there's interest rate problem, of course we have to deal with it. We have to deal with it in other ways. But the signal to the companies must be that this is a path that the government is going ahead. We will have to make investments with these numbers in mind, bearing in mind that our investments in the petrochemical industry or in the power generation industry is multi-year. Multi-year. So if we have targets, carbon tax rates that cannot be even certain for the next 4, 5, 6 years, how can they make long-term projections? I find it very difficult for companies to do that. I'll find it very difficult for financiers, for banks to also do that. And here, I think I'm receiving slightly mixed messages. The message is, we want to fly the environmental flag. We want to be sustainable. We want to be able to address our constituents who want us to, be as green as possible. But when it comes to the hard decision of making changes, of making company change and invest in renewables, reduce efficiency, reduce utility, reduce water, circular economy, reduce waste. Hang on, I think there's an economic condition, and therefore, So we have to decide for ourselves. Is this carbon tax something that we need to do? And if we need to do we need certainty? If we need certainty, how do we address conditions that we do not foresee? If we have a COVID-19 again, touch wood, hope that we'll never have it, but if we have a COVID-19, we have a major recession, of course we have to think about ways to cushion. But that doesn't mean that we are turning back to fossil again. I mean, that's the message that we have been telling all the large emitters in the world in COP. Even though there's energy crisis out there, please don't turn your eyes away from the problem. So I hope that members will support what we are doing, understand that we are not blind to concerns, except that we need to give clarity to companies, to invest, to change, to adopt a way of low carbon production that we cannot delay anymore, even as we are confronting some major challenges out there.
Ms. Herting-Ru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a clarification for the Minister. If I'm not wrong, the Minister said earlier that our proposed registry would breach confidentiality protections afforded under the carbon pricing regime. May I ask for further details about the specific provisions or maybe the law that they would breach? Or was she saying that there's a risk of some revelation to some deduction being made to allow people to make inferences? Of course, bearing in mind again that we are not asking for details about the amount surrendered in excess of the 5%, which is the currently proposed threshold. And also, if she's saying that she's the government's unable to support the registry, what safeguards are there? To make sure that there's better accountability for the ICC surrender regime, as it's important. This balance. We get it right, and also it does not end up making it look like entities can buy their way out of the decarbonization process, even when that really is not the case under the regime. And also, just to follow on from my colleague, Mr. Pereira's point earlier, can we have a bit more details about what aggregate data will be published to address concerns that were previously mentioned? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that I've addressed Member Ms. Ho's question or clarification questions earlier in my speech. That it is really not in our interest at this point in time. Hold us accountable eventually for our overall performance on carbon abatement and carbon mitigation. I think let us run an effective, flexible, nimble system so that we can really catch the wind and be as effective as we can in developing a new economy.
Ms. Herting-Ru.
Sorry, just to clarify, is the Minister saying that the confidentiality provisions that will be breached are specific legal provisions that would be breached? Sorry if I missed that point. Thank you.
I believe the fourth schedule of the CPA restricts disclosure to specified public offices.
Mr. Patrick Tay? Was it Mr. Lewis Ng's arm? There was an arm there that was raised? No? Okay. It's a long day. No, it's perfectly fine. Question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Carbon Pricing Amendment Bill.
Committee stage, what day?
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Oh, sorry. Sir, I beg to move that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill.
The question is that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Question is that clauses 1 to 12 stand part of the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 13, there are 12 amendments standing in the name of Mr. Leon Pereira as indicated in the order paper supplement. The Minister for Finance has signified that the President's recommendation under Article 59(2) of the Constitution is required for amendments 1 to 3 and 8 to 12. Do these amendments have the recommendation of the President?
No, sir.
As the President's recommendation is not forthcoming for amendments 1 to 3 and 8 to 12, standing in Mr. Leon Pereira's name, as indicated in the order paper supplement, these amendments cannot be moved. Amendments 4 to 7, Mr. Pereira, please proceed to move these amendments together.
Mr. Speaker, sir, on a point of order, may I pose some questions to the Honourable Minister, the Leader of the House, on the process surrounding how the President was approached and how a recommendation was sought. May I do that at this stage?
Leader, would you like to explain?
Yeah, so specifically what I would like to ask is when was the concurrence of the President sought for my amendments, and is it correct to say that the advice of the President was sought, but at the same time that advice could only be given from the office of the President based on the advice of the relevant minister or the advice of Cabinet? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the specific amendments in question that Mr. Leon Pereira has asked me about are the amendments in his notice of amendment. I think Clause 13, Amendments 1 to 3, and Amendments 8 to 12. Now, under Article 59(2) of the Constitution provides that the recommendation of the President is required for a bill or an amendment that makes provision, whether directly or indirectly, for one of the stated financial matters. Those financial matters would include, for example, increasing or reducing taxes. When a bill has such implications, the fiscal implications, or when an amendment to a bill has such fiscal implications, the President's recommendation is required. That is provided for under Standing Order 67, paragraph 1, which provides that it is the duty of the Minister for Finance to inform the Speaker before moving amendments to a bill whether the recommendations of the President is required by law. This has been done. It was done by way of notification to Parliament, which was circulated by way of notice paper number 1522 to all members. So members would have received that, which means that all members, including Mr. Leon Pereira and the Workers' Party, would be aware that the President's recommendation is necessary. Now, just in terms of timing, though, I need to remind members that the notice of amendment actually came in 2 clear days before the sitting, which means on Wednesday. So just 2 Wednesday evening, and that means Thursday and Friday. Thursday and Friday, the government had to look at the amendments and assess to see whether or not such amendments had any fiscal implications. It was not, I should add, notified to us by the Workers' Party, who had prepared the amendments, that it would have fiscal implications, which one would actually expect you to do, knowing that President's recommendation is to be signified. So we had to check that through, and that took some time. Then Mr. Leon Pereira's next question really is, well, whether the President's recommendation was sought, if so, when, etc. I must say, I do find that when you give government less than 48 hours notice, and not to mention the fact that there was no follow-up on the part of the Workers' Party even to find out whether anything would be done in this respect, I have to say that I find that it's somewhat, well, let us put it this way. You give less than 48 hours and somebody has to do the running for you. But in any event, the President's recommendation is not given for the members' amendments. This is because the government has assessed whether the amendments in question, that is amendments 1 to 3 and 8 to 12, could not be supported on the merits. We determined that they could not be supported for the reasons explained earlier by my colleagues in the second reading debate, and as the amendments could not be supported, they were not put forward to the President for the President's recommendation. And this is perfectly in order, as the constitutional requirement for the President's recommendation to be sought for amendments with financial implications is a procedure that safeguards the government's financial initiative. The President would act in accordance with the government's advice in giving or not giving the required recommendation. It is not unique to us. It is a long-established feature of Westminster parliaments that the government of the day has the sole right and responsibility to initiate financial legislation. The government may therefore also take the decision not to put forward amendments with financial implications for the recommendation.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
Mr. Speaker, sir, can I just give a brief response to Minister Indrani Raja's points on procedure?
We're not having a debate on this issue. If you have any clarification, we can pose that. Otherwise, I suggest we move on to amendments 4 to 7, please.
Mr. Chairman, sir, could I just briefly respond to Minister Indrani Raja on her observations about the process of filing, not to reopen the substantive debate, but just to respond to 1 or 2 of observations.
Keep it short.
Yeah. So, Ms. Sertingru and myself filed the amendments with the Clerk of Parliament on the Monday. I do understand the point that the Minister is making, that the notice was sent out to all members of Parliament on the Wednesday, but I just want to make the point that we did file the amendments that we plan to move on the Monday, and I do also want to make the observation that we received the notification that the President's recommendation was necessary on the Saturday at about 1 p.m. So we worked on it from that point on. Anyway, those are just some brief observations. Mr. Chairman, sir, I would like to move the amendments numbers 4 to 7, standing in the order paper supplement in my name. I'd like to move those amendments.
Leader.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just a very quick response, and not to belabor the matter. I understand that the member may have put in the amendments earlier. All I'm saying is that it actually would be helpful, even though the standing orders have a specific procedural requirement of time, that you can actually, of your own volition, also notify the government ahead of time, so that would actually give us a little bit more time. So that's all I'm saying in terms of just a matter of, adequate time and preparation. One does not go, in this case, we had taken a decision and looked at it, decided not to put forward the recommendation. But I would just like to remind members that when one does not go to the President with less than 48 hours and say, here it is, please make a decision now, the President, if something was put forward, would have to consider things that would take some time. But in this case, as the government, having taken a decision, had made the decision not to put it forward for the reasons stated.
Leader of Opposition.
Just to the Leader of the House, thank you for the clarification. There was no intention to give the government very little time to respond. I think this is a novel process insofar as at least my time in the House has been concerned. I don't think this particular memo, such a memo, has come up. I think the intention was to make sure we file on time as per standing orders, which we did. And thereafter, on the Saturday after Mr. Pereira received a note from the Clerk of Parliament, I think he followed up with the Clerk of Parliament with a list of questions as to procedure and so forth. So there was no intention to try and give the government very little time to respond or anything of that sort. I just thought I ought to put that on the record.
Leader.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his clarification. Thank you.
Question is as proposed by the member. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the noes have it. The noes have it. Original Clause 13 is now before the House. The question is that Clause 13 sends part of the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. Let's repeat that again. The question is that Clause 13 sends part of the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 14 to 28 send part of the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 29, Ms. Hertingru.
Sir, I beg to move amendments indicated to Clause 29, standing in my name, as indicated in the order paper supplement.
The question is as proposed by the member. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the noes have it. The noes have it. The original Clause 29 is now before the House. The question is that Clause 29 stands part of the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 30 to 43 stand part of the bill. As many as of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported. Minister for Sustainability and Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to report that the bill has been considered in committee and agreed to without amendments.
Third reading, what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Carbon Pricing Amendment Bill.